Join us for a special meeting for CBF parents and adults being hosted by CBF Kids and Summit Student Ministry on April 2nd from 9 to 1. Breakfast, lunch, and childcare are provided. You can contact Nathan Lee to get a link for registration, or you can check Friday's email. You need to register by Sunday, March 27th. Due to the sensitive nature of the subject matter at this meeting, it will be for CBF members and regular attenders only and will not be open to the public. We have a new adult Bible study beginning April 3rd during the first service in room 202. It's led by Bob Wilkin, the author of The 10 Most Misunderstood Words in the Bible. Learn and discuss key words like saved, lost, heaven, hell, faith, repentance, and more. The cost is $10 per person. You can register online, or you can contact Bob Wilkin with any questions. Join us Easter weekend for our Good Friday service, family picnic and egg hunt, and identical Easter services at 9 and 10:45. We will also decorate our cross that stands on the property throughout the weekend. But we need your help with flowers and greenery on Easter morning. You can find all the details on our website.
Good morning. We're so glad you chose to worship with us this morning online. Just want to let you know we also have services in person at 9 a.m. and 10:45 on Sunday mornings. We'd love to see you there, meet you, get to know you, and welcome you into our community here at CBF. Now join us as we transition into our worship time.
Bring your pain that you've been hiding. Bring your scars and bring your shame. Every failure, every secret. Bring your fear that things won't change. Bring your dreams and bring your worries. Highest highs and lowest lows. Every hope you pin your heart on. Every hurt you can't let go.
To the one whose name is healed, to the one who came to save, to the one whose love is stronger than the power of the grave. Come and raise your hallelujah to the God who overcomes.
Lift your hands, lift your heart.
I do have to pick on Steve for just a second there. He made the announcement regarding the class that we have coming up. It's the 10 most misunderstood words in the Bible. I think he said understood because if we have the 10 most understood, there's no reason to have a class. So just want to make sure everybody knows that. But that's my little thing I'm going to get Steve with tomorrow. But good morning. If you are our guest, thank you for joining us. We are just so privileged to have you here to worship with us. My name is Nathan Lee. I'm the Associate Pastor of Family Ministry here at CBF. It's my pleasure to be here this morning. I'm glad it wasn't last week. Brian, our Student Ministry Director, got to preach last week, but I said, you know what? You can have the time change, and you can have Thyatira, because I don't want to have to say it a lot. In fact, we had a bet with each other to see if he could say it repeatedly the wrong way, but different each time. And I don't think he did that. But if you weren't here, let me just announce for Brian. If you haven't heard, Brian is now engaged to his fiancee, Sarah Nutter, and they are getting married coming up very quickly. But he's not here this morning because the student ministry retreat is happening down at Forest Glen Camp. They're on their way back. So just think of them, pray for safety for them. One of my favorite things in life, it brings me tremendous amount of joy, is to see my children on the Monday morning after a vacation. When they come downstairs and you can see all of the hope dashed out of them because they know they have to go to school. They are moving, but you know that inside they're dead. Because they're going through the motions of getting ready, but really, and this is the time that I love because this is the moment where things in our house are said like, hey, Garrett, your pants are on backwards. Or, Garrett, your shirt's inside out. Or in the case of someone I know, you wore 2 different shoes to work this morning. True story, happened to my father. Executive at Frito-Lay went to work with 2 different shoes on. In our family, we were taught to be early risers. It was built into us from a very young age. It was meant that when your feet hit the floor, you were awake, you were aware, and you were ready to go. There was none of this going through the motions where you're completely asleep inside. In fact, I tried to test that when I was in high school in November by coming to my dad and saying, hey, you know what? I know that I'm struggling at that first class in the morning, that math class, but I really think if you could I just can't wake up. My thought being, just give me that extra half hour of sleep. His solution was in the middle of November to take me outside, kick me into the pool and say, swim laps. Give me 10 laps in November and then you'll be awake. Me being the individual that I am, thought I could wait him out and continue. So I had to do it for like 5 days. I was stubborn enough to say, I ain't gonna give the old man the satisfaction. I'm not gonna quit. Yeah, so 5 days of jumping in the pool and having to swim laps. He had a bunch of other ones, like hiding a portable PA system behind my door and yelling into it to wake us up, or singing the Rawhide theme through the intercom in the house. We were taught, be awake, be ready, wake up. It's interesting that in our passage today, wake up is said twice, because last night I got up at 1:30 in the morning and could not go back to sleep. I don't know why. Have you ever had that situation where you're dead asleep, all of a sudden you wake up, and then that's it. You're up for the rest of the night. And so I thought, great, Lord, I'm talking about a church where you tell them twice to wake up, and I'm not even sure I'm here this morning. But that's where we are. We are in our series on the 7 churches of Revelation. Today I get to speak on the church in Sardis. The church in Sardis, the city of Sardis, is a city that had a grand and great and glorious past. The Sardians, and I looked it up, it is Sardians. I thought it would be Sardisians. It's Sardians, which every time I hear that, I expect William Shatner to say fire photon torpedoes. Because Sardian sounds like a bad guy from Star Trek. No, this is a city that had a very rich and glorious past. It was at one time the capital city of the ancient kingdom of Lydia. It was known for its wealth and its grandeur. In fact, King Croesus was so wealthy, you've probably heard the phrase, as rich as Croesus. Maybe you've heard that before. It is said that they were able to dredge gold out of the river by putting fabric or cloth or wool and be able to dredge the gold out of it. It was that wealthy. It was a city that was built on top of a plateau or a hill that was surrounded on 3 sides by nearly sheer cliffs. The Acropolis, the citadel at the top where the people would take refuge in time of war, was said to be impenetrable, impregnable. No one could get inside because of these cliffs. Now on the south side that was sloped up, But this instilled a sense of confidence in the people, in the confidence in King Croesus himself, so much so that at some point he actually invaded the kingdom of Cyrus the Great. Because he wanted to stop the expansion, there were a couple of other circumstances, and after consulting the oracle at Delphi, which is, of course, is a trusted source, he believed that he would be victorious. And so he actually invaded the Persian kingdom, invaded Cyrus's kingdom, where they fought, and both armies came to a complete standstill. Now, why am I sharing all this? Because there are three features of the city of Sardis that I believe parallel this passage in Revelation. This is the first one, this citadel on the hill. And so in this battle, they come to a stalemate. Croesus withdraws to Sardis to hide, to sequester himself inside this citadel with the hope that reinforcements will arrive. He sent messages out to other armies, including the Spartans, but they were wrapped up, as usual, in another war, because that's what they did for recreation. And he's waiting. Cyrus hears about this, that they're behind the walls of their citadel, and so he comes and lays siege to the city. And they are confident. We are Sardis. We're behind our walls. There's nobody getting in this. In fact, from history, we understand that they actually removed guards or did not have any guards on one of the battlements because they were so confident of their past that there's no way that they were going to take the city. Does anybody know how they got in? It's a funny story. One of the Sardian soldiers dropped his helmet, and it rolled down the hill, and he went to get it, and they followed him back up. They figured out how to get up the cliffs and take the city, and in fact, they did. They conquered the city. Croesus was actually allowed to live. He basically said, hey, you know what, Cyrus, you're just taking what's yours. So he was allowed to live. But here's the thing about Sardis. It never retained its glory and influence ever again. In fact, in AD 17, an earthquake destroyed it. Tiberius, the emperor at the time, said, you know what, you don't have to pay us tribute, and we're actually going to help you rebuild the city. But it was never, despite wealth and despite commercial success, it was never the power that it used to be. Now, that's the first feature of the city, is this citadel on top of the hill that while they thought was impenetrable, turns out actually wasn't. The second one is this temple to Artemis that was being built at Sardis. The excavations have shown that they were building this temple, and it was to be as big as the temple in Ephesus, except for one major factor. They never finished it, which is a theme that will run through this passage as well. We have resting in the glory of your past, but also failing to complete something. And that is what happened at this temple. This grand construction project that was begun, but never finished. The third one is a tremendous necropolis, a cemetery that is said could be seen from miles away. A cemetery of 1,000 hills just stretched across the horizon. And death is going to be a word that is repeated by the Lord himself to this church several times in this passage. Because here is a church that on the outside looks alive and vibrant, at least its reputation is, but inside, as the Lord says, it is dead. So we're going to pick up in chapter 3 of Revelation. If you turn there, chapter 3, and starting in verse 1, it says, to the angel of the church in Sardis write, he who has the 7 spirits of God and the 7 stars says this, I know your deeds, that you have a name that you are alive, but you are dead. Wake up and strengthen the things that remain, which were about to die, for I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God. So remember what you have received and heard, and keep it and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. But you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. He who overcomes will thus be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life. And I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Now, if you were to take a drive this afternoon, maybe a 30-minute drive, how many churches do you think you would see? Here in Coppell, Flower Mound, it's practically one on every corner. When I lived up north, you could drive everywhere and you'd see a Catholic church, a Greek Orthodox church, but just a mainstream church like us, a Bible church, were few and far between. In fact, the church that I had worked at was so unusual in that area that they were called a cult. It was a very different environment. But here, as you travel around, you see churches all over. And for some of you, maybe you were driving by and saw Coppell Bible, and your first thought was, that looks like a great place. I wonder what it's like inside. But you can't really gauge a church until you step in and experience it. You can look at their building, and it looks very active. It looks like a lot of great stuff is going on, but let's find out what's going on inside. And so as this passage begins, we have Jesus speaking, the one who has the seven spirits of God, the fullness of the Spirit, God who sees all, knows all, is in control over these seven churches that have been written to, who is in possession of them, sees to the very core, knows exactly what's going on, says this, I know your deeds. Now that's a great start, because we've had several of these churches that have had commendations that I know your deeds and I see all of these great things. But this is not a commendation. This is an observation. I know your deeds, and you seem to be alive to everybody else, to the external. You look like you're alive, but in reality, you're dead. The internal does not match the external, and that's an issue. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you hit a stagnation point, or you felt your church hit a stagnation point where it was just like, we're just not growing inside. I just don't feel like I'm growing in my discipleship. I don't feel like I'm growing in my walk with Christ. I know I have everlasting life because that comes by the free gift of believing in Jesus for that, nothing else. And I possess that. I know I possess that at the moment I believe, but I'm just not getting anywhere. And I just don't feel like the people around me are. Right outside that door is our mission statement that Coppell Bible exists to make disciples by equipping believers to know and experience the love of Jesus Christ and to make his love known to the world. That's why we're here. That's why our church exists. To feed into you, to encourage you, to help disciple you, to equip you so that you may step out these doors and continue in that discipleship every day beyond Sunday, each day of the week. And that in that, you can be an example to the world around you. Not that this is a dynamic place where great things are going on and we're having great programs like Trunk or Treat or whatever, but that the people of Coppell Bible are growing in their discipleship. That they are believers committed to the work of God. That's what we want. In fact, that's why we did the survey. If you took the survey, thank you very much. If you didn't have a chance to, I predict that we will do more in the future. But the purpose of the survey was not a pat on the back of the leadership to say, hey, great job, though that does at times, stroke the egos. We have to check ourselves. That's why Brent's not here today. His head's so big. I'm kidding. But it is to gauge where our church is in its growth. It is to gauge where are the places that our people are sitting there saying, I'm not growing. I don't feel like I'm really maturing. And for us to help address that and to encourage you. Because you can come here on a Sunday and we have great teaching here. But if it isn't applied daily, if it isn't continuing in your own personal study, your own personal growth, then we look good, but we're dead inside. Nothing's happening. And I believe there's a little bit more that's going on here that we're going to get in here to a few minutes. And I think it relates directly to us right here, right now, in America, in the world, today. Something that's very familiar to us. But he says your reputation is to him to be alive, but you're actually dead inside. Now that could be that this was an actual reputation that they had, that everyone said this Sardis church is great. Maybe it's a reputation that they put out to everybody. Hey, we're the place to be. I don't know. Maybe it's both. But the solution that Jesus presents here, this is you have this dead church that needs to be resuscitated. So in verse 2, this was as I'm laying there at 1:30 in the morning chuckling to myself going, okay, Lord, thanks, appreciate this. The very first two words are wake up. Wake up. Now, wake up in the sense of be alert, be observant, understand what's going on around you. Think back to the Sardians who were taken by Cyrus. Were they alert? No, they were comfortable behind their walls. There was no need to be. We were impenetrable. Nobody was going to get in here. So we can let our guard down. We can rest in our glorious past, of the great things that happened in this city, knowing there's no way this city is going to fall. The same way that churches can be tied up in their great founding, their past, and miss the fact that from the inside they're dying out. Because it's very easy for us as people to rest on our laurels and forget the fact that we are supposed to continue in maturity as believers. We're supposed to be maturing. There's not a terminal point in this life where we go, I've arrived and now I can take a break. Because the Lord says, as we're going to see later on, is you are to continue in faith. You are to continue in obedience so that you might have the privilege of being one of the overcomers. The believers who are faithful to the end. That doesn't mean that believers who are not overcomers will not be in eternity, that they've lost their salvation, but there are those who will be faithful, who will be committed, who will be focused, that there will be special honor and reward, as we see, for those who, as Jesus says, will be clothed in white because they have not been stained by the world. So the first thing is to wake up, be alert, because there is a little bit that remain. The things that remain which were about to die, for I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God. So Sardis is mostly dead. I got a better laugh this morning. I also heard some people go, I have no idea where that's from. Come on. Sardis is mostly dead. There's a little bit that remains, and if they don't wake up, they're going to be fully dead. All the way dead. Because those few things that remain are the hope that this church has if they are to strengthen those, to dive into those, that will bring them back to life. Because that is Christ working in them and through them. So what might be those things that remain? How would you revive a dead church? Well, one thing before we jump into that is that he notes is that your deeds are not complete. Have you noticed the parallels between the city of Sardis and the church? They have this glorious past, they have this great past, but now they're dying too. They don't finish what they started. And maybe that's individually, personally, their growth. Maybe they started on the right path of discipleship and then got distracted by something and just gave up. Or maybe there's some sin in their life that is pulling them away from their discipleship. Whatever it is, it appears that the majority have given up or stopped growing. My dad used to tell me that, Nathan, he said, you're too distracted by the sparklies in the world. Now, if you know that movie reference, that's from The Secret of NIMH. Anybody remember that cartoon that traumatized most of us as children? There's a crow, and every time he's supposed to focus on something, they wave every time they wave a sparkly thing, and he's like, his eyes get all crazy because he loves sparkly things. And my dad used to tell me, he said, Nathan, you're so distracted by the sparkly things that they get in the way of your discipleship. They get in the way of your maturity. They get in the way of growing. Where you should be focused on Christ, you're more worried about what's going on over here in this world right now. And so you've taken that and made that priority over God himself, over Jesus Christ himself. And I believe in Sardis, because they are in the city. You notice one thing that's not happening? Do you see persecution? Do you see false teaching? You don't see any of those. They're just kind of there. And maybe they've embraced the things of the world and are prioritizing them. Maybe they've just decided that they're not going to be offensive to those around them. Maybe they're just kind of, you know what, we're going to be here and live our lives and enjoy life, but that's the most important thing. What's happening is they're not growing. They're dying off. And so the Lord says, your works aren't completed before my Father. You still have time to go. You're not done yet. Remember that. And so he says, here's the solution. Now, in many cases, or I've heard people say, I shouldn't say many cases, that's unfair. But in a lot of instances, I have heard people say, I'm not growing because I'm not getting the deeper stuff. I'm not growing because I don't have more information. I don't have more of the details. I don't have this greater understanding of these things over here. Why are we always hearing about grace? Why are we always hearing about the gospel? Why are we always hearing about the free gift of salvation? Why are we always hearing about discipleship? There's more in the Bible. I've heard people say that. Why? Look at what Jesus says. To strengthen, go back to the things you have already heard. You have forgotten that. You want to strengthen what's good? Go back and remember who you are and how you got here. Remember the teaching that was shared with you that established, that presented the message of salvation, the message of everlasting life. Remember how that has transformed you, that's given you the opportunity to live in that you don't have to worry about being separated from God. Once you have received everlasting life, it's permanent. You don't have to work. You don't have to be obedient in the fear that you might lose this. You have it. That's a freeing statement. If my life is motivated by pleasing the Lord instead of fear that I might lose something, that's unbelievably freeing. And where I was as a young teenager was in that idea that somehow God was always mad at me because I wasn't living up to what he wanted. And so maybe I'm not really saved. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Until one day, my youth pastor sat down with me and said, "That's just dumb. It's either everlasting life or it's not. And the problem is what you're doing is you're living in this fear that you could lose it. That is superseding, and it's making you crazy. And it's making you frustrated, and you're just giving up. You're still coming to church. You're still putting on a good show. You still are this good kid. But inside, man, you're not growing. You're just afraid." But as believers, once we have everlasting life, God has an expectation that we would live in that we would go forward and mature, that we would be bold in the face of a world that is in opposition to his message, to his truth, a world that does not, it's full of lies. And we can make the decision to hide behind our walls and think it will pass, or we can be proactive and grow and be bold to speak that truth in the face of our enemy. But we have to wake up if we're in that position. Now, the great thing is I know so many people who aren't here that are just thriving, that are just growing in their faith, and they are bold for God's message. But I find myself at times feeling like, and doing, hiding behind the wall and resting on past glory instead of saying, you know what, I can't let this stuff distract me. I can't let this be more important than my relationship with the Lord. He says to remember those things you've heard, to keep them, not just cast them aside once you remember them, but to hold tightly to them, keep them in your mind always, be in his word, be in relationship with him, be in prayer with him. That should be something that we would hopefully desire. So in that we have a greater understanding of him, a greater understanding of his grace, but hold tightly to that. Don't just say, hey, that's great, and set it down. And then this next statement. I don't know about you guys, but when I read this, the first time I've kind of, as younger, I'd pass by it and go, okay. But sometimes this makes me a little nervous. And I think rightfully so, because it puts my mind in the right perspective of me in relation to God. It says, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. Now, you probably heard this similarly last week with the church in Thyatira, where they had false teaching going on and being drawn off. He says, if you don't fix this, if they don't turn and repent from this evil they're committing, then I'm going to come and I'm going to discipline them. And we've heard thief. I grew up I was in kindergarten in like the late 70s. You guys remember those movies like Thief in the Night that they would take us and traumatize children with? I went to a private school like, hey, it's movie day. And we'd go in there and it'd be one of these tribulation movies where people are getting their heads cut off. And at the end they'd go, okay, who wants to trust Jesus? And then the counseling would happen. But that was my idea, was always a thief, a God coming a thief. That just means that he's coming back one day and he's going to snatch us away, and we won't know when that happens. But there's a reality that God disciplines his people. That God will see his people, and if they are going in the wrong direction willingly, he will discipline them. But he does give them time. But at some point, the Lord will act. And one of the things that I just was so shocking to me one time, I heard someone say, you never want to get to the point where the Lord says, well, You're not doing me any good here. Why don't you come home? Because what we want to be in this time that we have is living out our mission, living out this everlasting life. I mean, we've been given life. Go live. It seems like a very trite statement, but when you're given that opportunity, when you're given everything that you need for righteous living by the Lord himself, why wouldn't we not choose to do that? It seems to be crazy not to. It seems to be insane to look back outside these walls and say, you know what, the world has so much to offer that is dead itself. Why don't I just bring it on in and embrace it? Because what's outside the walls that the world has to offer, what our enemy has to offer, is dead. We don't want to be dead inside here and inside our own hearts. But he says, you need to fix this now. You don't need to wait. You don't need to sit there and say, hey, one day we'll get to this. One day, you know what? It's not a problem. He says, now is the time to address this. I don't know about you, but that is, you know, you hear pastors say that. I don't know about you, but that's super convicting. Truthfully, it really is for me. Because I do have that danger of allowing whatever it is to distract me to the point where what we do here on a weekly basis, it just becomes routine. I come to work. To say that, I come to work. I have the best role ever in just so much fun and so much joy to be a part of this. It doesn't make me super important. The Lord has given me the opportunity. It's all about him. But it's such a fantastic place to be just because it's so much fun. But sometimes I just see it as that, and it's a responsibility. When I was growing up, church was just something you went to. I got to go because my friends are there. And as I grew up and got older, that was when people started saying, well, you know what? It's more than that. It's not a checklist box thing you do, and then the rest of the week you're just, hey, world's awesome. I'm just going to be like these people. If we've been given everlasting life by believing in him, we are different than those who have not received it. We are different, and we're meant to be different. We're meant to be set apart. We're meant to live differently. Not as a we're better than you, but remember, as Peter says, we are just passing through. We are aliens and strangers. We are travelers. And anytime I used to tell this to youth, anytime you go to another country, what's the one criticism Americans have? We're ugly Americans, right? We don't want to be ugly believers. We don't want to be weak believers as we're passing through. We want to be loving beacons of God's grace, of his message. That's what we want to be, because we want as many people to know the truth. We can't do that behind walls. We can't do that sitting here and being comfortable with just coming and hearing a message and then going out the rest of our week and doing whatever we want. Now, here's some positive. Verse 4, but you have a few people in Sardis who have not soiled their garments, and they will walk with me in white, for they are worthy. So you think, maybe in James, you remember pure and undefiled religion is visiting orphans and widows and keeping yourself unstained from the world, essentially. And I know that we say the orphans and widows part, but there's that second part is don't be stained by the world. Keep yourself separate from the world in the sense that it's not influencing you. You're in it. You have your time here, but it should not be radically changing who you are. You would hopefully be that beacon of moral character and spiritual growth for people to see. He said, there's a few of you remain that are that. And that's a wonderful thing, because what's going to happen is when they get to the end and they are with me, they are going to walk in garments of white. They are going to be honored. They're going to be presented before, as we'll see, God the Father as those who are overcomers. Now, here at Coppell Bible, we want to be very clear about what the overcomer is. The overcomer are believers who have been faithful to the end in obedience and are honored and receive reward for the life that they lived here. That is not to say that anyone who is not an overcomer is cast into hell and never really had their salvation. Salvation is free. And if you have believed, you have it. Everlasting life. But the reality is, because God has called us to live in obedience, to go forward and live that out in our lives, to grow and mature, to speak truth, to speak his gospel to the world, to speak his message, to be that beacon. He says, for those who hold to that, who make it all the way to the end, who are faithful to that, I will honor them before the Father. And, as it says in verse 5, he who overcomes thus will be clothed in white garments, and I will not erase his name from the book of life, and I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. Very clear, let me be very clear. The erase his name from the book of life, a couple weeks ago, Barkev talked about the term litotes. It's not saying that those who don't will be erased from the book of life. It is exactly saying the opposite, that all who believe have everlasting life, but those who are overcomers will be honored before the Father. It's an extreme away from he's basically saying, no. They are going to be honored and rewarded before the Father. He will stand before the Father and say, this is my good and faithful servant who served well, who lived well, who followed me, lived in that dependence that only God can provide, living by the Spirit in us and through us, that only he can do. We were faithful to that. You hear a lot of criticisms of the American church that, unfortunately, a lot of times I don't think it's necessarily fair, but because we're a big target, that's an easy thing for the people within our borders to kind of aim for. That we don't really care. We're just hypocrites. We're just putting on a show. But we don't really mean what we say. We don't live out what we say. That we're only interested in ourselves. There's actually a quote regarding the city of Sardis by Herodotus. I'm not going to pronounce that correctly. But in talking about the people of Sardis, he described them as the tender-footed Lydians who can only play on the cithara, strike the guitar, and sell by retail. Who's that sound like? They only care about their own stuff and having a good time. Let that kind of dwell in your mind for a minute. That's what we don't want to be at all. We don't want to be so consumed with what the world has and comfortable in that it overshadows or takes the place of God as the priority. I am not saying you should go home and sell everything. When we used to take kids to Mexico to build houses down there, the first thing all of them did was like, I'm selling all my stuff. And I'm going to be poor for the rest of my life because being poor means that I am way more spiritual than everybody else. And we would say, you don't think anybody in that house that we just built wouldn't trade spots with you if they had the opportunity? It's not about whether you should have it or not. It's about whether it's greater than God in your life or not. Some of us are incredibly blessed. We have been blessed by the Lord with things that we can use, whether it's money or homes that we can use as part of his mission. Kim and I decided very early on, any house that we buy will be an open door to anyone to come in because that's how we get to share God's love. That's how we get to help disciple students. Our door is open. It's not closed off. It's not our walls. It's open to anybody to come. I didn't want to do that, but she said, that's what we're doing. She said, that's what we're doing. We're not doing it. She said, you know what? You need to have 5 friends that aren't at church. That was something that when we first got married, she said, you have to have 5 friends that aren't at church because you are not going to hide. We want to be a church that's alive. I originally was going to title this message, because of a little inside joke with Marla in the office, The Church of the Walking Dead. We seem to have this weird fascination with this whole idea of the living dead and zombies and all that. But when I look at my kids coming down on a Monday morning for school, that's literally what I describe them as. Man, you're like just a zombie walking into the walls, falling down the stairs. You seem like you got everything together, but inside you have zero idea. You're just basically a corpse at this point until you wake up. As God's church, we need to constantly be looking at ourselves to say, are we awake? Or are we falling into the terrible trap of embracing the world and allowing it to soil us, to supersede God in our lives, so that we effectively become a church that looks good on the outside, but inside is stone cold dead. That's what we must guard against. And we can only do that by committing ourselves to following the Lord, to be in His Word, to spend time in prayer, so that we would have that strengthened relationship with Him so that He can work in us and through us. Would you pray with me?
Clothe me in garments of praise. Jesus, forever my song will be you. Yes, Lord. I'm living in freedom. You've taken my burdens away. Jesus, forever my song will be you. Only for you. For the cross that you bore and the debt that you paid, for the victory you won over death and the grave. This is the reason I sing, for the hope that you give and the joy that you bring, for the promise that heaven is waiting for me. This is the reason I sing. Testify of your grace. Jesus, forever my song will be you. Only for you. For the cross that you bore and the debt that you paid, for the victory you won over death and the grave. This is the reason I sing, for the hope that you give and the joy that you bring, for the promise that heaven is waiting for me. This is the reason I sing. So good, so good, so good to me. Tell me. Forever I'll sing. So good to me. So good, so good, so good to me. Forever I'll sing. So good to me. For the cross that you bore and the debt that you paid, for the victory you won over death and the grave. This is the reason I sing, for the hope that you give and the joy that you bring, for the promise that heaven is waiting for me. This is the reason I sing, for the cross that you bore and the debt that you paid, for the victory you won over death and the grave. This is the reason I sing, for the hope that you give and the joy that you bring, for the promise that heaven is waiting for me. This is the reason I sing. This is the reason I sing.
Well, I hope you're encouraged this morning by the word and our worship, and I hope we get to see you before too long here in person at one of our services, 9 or 10:45. Have a fantastic week.